So Destiny 2's new DLC, Forsaken, has been out for roughly about 3 weeks, give or take a couple of hours here and there, and most people have gotten through the majority of the big content, and most everybody's getting ready to put out their overview slash review of how they feel about this new DLC. Me personally, I've never done a vocal review before, so this is going to be a little bit weird, and this is going to take some getting used to. But I just thought that as a longtime Destiny fan, I should give people just my personal take on it. I've logged in roughly about 35 hours into Forsaken. I've completed the campaign, I've beaten the majority of the raid. Sadly, I have not made it to the final boss yet. I've gotten a sizable amount of the new content. I've got a pretty good idea of how the grind is going to go, and I've got a fairly good idea of how long the end game is going to last, and it has helped me kind of create an overall verdict of how I feel about Forsaken. So this review is going to start with the campaign. We're going to move into what kind of content we got in this, especially what kind of new content we got, and as opposed to what rehashed or remastered content we got. We're then going to move into the grind of Forsaken and talk about whether or not it's going to last all that long. Additionally, leading into that, we're going to talk about the end game, how long it takes you to really hit that point, and when you start earning that gear, and whether or not the end game is really going to play that big of a role in Forsaken as opposed to what we already have in Destiny. We're then going to lead that into the final verdict and talk about specifically how I feel Forsaken stands up, not only to the rest of Destiny 2, but how it stands up to the legacy of Destiny and Bungie in general. So without further ado, we're going to get started with the campaign, starting right now. So Destiny 2's Forsaken campaign is a fairly quick-paced one. It's not necessarily something that's going to jump out and slap you in the face with how original it is. It doesn't necessarily take too many risks, and it doesn't really establish itself as anything that you should not expect to come from Destiny. Now that in itself is not meant to be a detriment to the story. It is a very well told story. The acting is all on high par and is definitely the best that Destiny has seen so far. And the pacing in general is actually very well done. Now the reason for this is that while there is only a few main campaigns that have cutscenes in it, the pacing is specifically up to the player and how they want to continue this game and how they want to beat the Barons or the new bosses in Destiny 2's campaign and how they want to go about avenging Cayde. Now this in particular works very well because pacing has always been a problem with Destiny in the sense that it either tries to rush you along by giving you too much powerful gear right off the bat, or it slows things to such a monotonous crawl that nobody wants to actually take the time to finish the game and to actually put any real effort into completing the tasks that they're given and completing the quests that are in their inventory. So Forsaken actually giving you that option to pace the campaign and the gear rewards and everything at your own leisure is incredibly well done. You don't even need to finish the main campaign to do the majority of the new content, but it will certainly help you when it comes to the end game. So when it comes to just the campaign, this is probably the strongest that Destiny the series has seen so far. I know a lot of people like to point out that the main campaign of Destiny 2, the one that was originally shipped with the game, is a very good example of the kind of cinematic storytelling that Destiny is capable of and that these writers are capable of when given the proper treatment and the proper workspace to do what they want with the story. And that is very true. Destiny 2's main campaign does a very good job of showing you just how exactly talented these people actually are, not only with acting, but with storytelling, with cinematics, and most importantly with pacing. But as I said before, the pacing of the main campaign for me was a big detriment because I felt that in between the individual missions, things slowed to such a crawl as I had to boost myself through multiple activities that it took away from the overall enjoyment of the campaign for me. Now I understand that the reason to that was so that you could get introduced to all these new things that Destiny 2 brought with it, but for me personally, the pacing of it just killed it for me. Now, I've already stated that the pacing in Forsaken is much, much better, and that's a big reason why I say that it's the best story and campaign that Destiny has had so far. But a lot of this also has to do with the emotional payoff and the acting and the story on display in Forsaken. Now, the story isn't necessarily anything complicated. You're going to avenge Cayde 6, you're going to take back the Tangled Shore and the Reef, and you're going to establish yourself as essentially a member of the Vanguard. Now, that part is more postulating on my half. But when it comes to the acting, this is probably the best that Destiny has ever seen, and hopefully it is not the best we will ever see, but it is incredibly well done. Seeing Zavala and Ikora's reaction to Cayde's death in particular will probably stick with gamers for quite a while, as it was incredibly emotional, and it actually showed just what these actors are really capable of when they're given the right dialogue and they're given the ability to actually act. Additionally, new characters such as the Spider are incredibly welcome additions to the game. The Spider is definitely one of the more enigmatic and charismatic NPCs we've ever seen. The Drifter also keeps up with Spider by being incredibly charismatic, although if you're not somebody who's really into the lore, you're not going to get all that much out of the Drifter. More on that later. When it comes to the actual story being told, as I said, it's not incredibly complicated, but what is very nice about this story is that it brings back a couple of characters that were really big boosts to the lore community, especially the people who have been around since Destiny 1. Now, the reason for this is that it brings back three of the biggest characters that people wanted to see in Destiny 2. It brings back Uldren Sov, it brings back Mara Sov, and it brings back Petra Vange. Now, Petra takes more of a leading role in terms of the end game, so we'll discuss her more a little bit later on. But in a story sense, it's just very nice to have her back, and I think everybody was happy that she's become part of the main crew. Now, Mara Sov is more of a topic that you should delve into on your own. Trust me when I say if you read into the lore of Mara Sov, you will not be disappointed. Just take it from me, seeing her actually in the game interacting with Uldren in this way was incredibly gratifying to somebody who is a big lore fan of the Destiny community, and it was a very nice touch done by Bungie. Additionally, Uldren is done very, very well. He does a very good job balancing this sort of delusional, like used tool kind of person and the same snarky kind of asshole that we saw in the original Destiny campaign. He's just very well done overall, and I'm very happy that they chose him to be the main antagonist, as he just perfectly pulls it off, and he was exactly what this campaign needed to really just kind of boost itself up from what we had seen before with Destiny, and I'm very glad that he was chosen. When it comes to the boss fights of the campaign and what they contribute to the story and what they contribute to the enjoyment of it, I will say the option of all the Barons being able to be played in their own respective manner and their own respective timeline was an incredibly good choice. Now, the boss fights in general, they aren't something that are going to necessarily blow your mind, but they are all different from each other, which is something that Destiny has had a problem with boss fights in the past, where all you had was just a bullet sponge enemy, and then there was another bullet sponge enemy, and then there was a bullet sponge boss. Kind of just the general feel of what you got out of every boss encounter. Some of these bosses take a lot of shots, some of these bosses don't take much shots at all, some of these bosses are a lot easier, some of them will give you an actual challenge. And it was just, each individual boss had a story, each individual boss has some lore, and each individual boss was distinct looking, distinct sounding, and they all carried with them a certain weight of wanting to avenge Cayde and wanting to take back the Tangled Shore. What this also does is creates a very nice sense of moral ambiguity that Destiny has always had in the foreground, but that was never really talked about or even really alluded to in Destiny 1, and even less so in Destiny 2. See, this campaign brings up a very interesting question, specifically when you start to face off against the Hangman, the Fanatic, the Mad Bomber, and the Trickster. And that question is, are our Guardians really good people, or are we people who are just carrying out orders and who are abusing our power because realistically there's nobody in the galaxies save for a very select few who can actually stop us?
Good luck!
This question has been in the background of Destiny for quite some time. It's always been a sort of hot topic between the lore community and the more casual community, but both communities who care about the story have been on different sides of the topic before. Are we really actually good people, or are we just doing this because we like the power and we like the killing? This campaign actually raises that question, and it does it fairly well. I will say that if you're somebody who's not really keen to paying attention to dialogue and you're just completing the campaign to get to the rewards, then you won't get that much out of it. But for the lore community and people that have been paying attention to dialogue and who, follow people like My Name is Bife or Terra Mantis or people that are just big lore communities, this was a very nice touch because it does show that other side of the Destiny universe that we just haven't really seen talked about in the campaigns so far. And that's just the sense of, are we really good people, or are we completely apathetic to the suffering that we cause to other races? Now, lastly, when it comes to the gear rewards for the campaign, now this is something I wanted to talk about specifically because I was very happy to see how they changed it in Forsaken. I was very strong to the opinion that both the base game, Osiris, and Warmind all made it too easy to give you high level exotics and legendary gear for completing the campaigns or just specific story missions. Now I do understand that there is a desire to kind of get players started and to give them a foothold. But for me personally, I felt that the base game and Osiris and Warmind, they gave you too much of an edge and they gave you too much right off the bat, and it made it very difficult to actually care about completing anything else because you knew that once you had beaten the campaign, you were pretty much going to be up to snuff and right up there with everybody else. In Forsaken, they actually give you a very limited amount of actual campaign rewards, and that you don't actually get a single exotic for completing the campaign. You are given exotic quests, but you are not given the exotic themselves, which is how it should have been since the very beginning, in my opinion. And additionally, while you do get some legendary gear, specifically you can get some Baron exclusive drops, and you can get some pretty high power stuff from completing the campaign itself. But a lot of these are stuff that you're going to be replacing, and a lot of them are going to actually be rare drops that you will definitely be replacing with legendaries in the near future when you finish. So this was especially nice to me because it made me feel a little bit more in tune with Destiny. It made me feel like I had to actually keep coming back to find these new things. Even after 35 hours, I've only managed to get 2 of the exclusive Forsaken exotics. Now, I'm not going to count Chaperone because even just perks-wise, they did not change a single thing. They just brought it over for fan service, so I technically have 3 if we're counting just when they dropped. But I don't really count Chaperone, and I know Ace of Spades was in the original Destiny as well, but the perks were completely different. It was a little bit less powerful, and it was just considerably easier to get, especially if you were somebody who played Destiny fairly often. So I would consider it to be a new exotic in my opinion. So when it comes to new content that we have in Forsaken, there's quite a bit to go through, so we're going to stagger it a little bit, and we're just going to talk about each one in no particular order. So the first thing we're going to discuss is the new space that you're given prior to completing the Exotic Talisman quest, and this area is called the Tangled Shore. Now this is a part of the reef that's basically split up into a few different sections and involves a lot of jumping and a lot of actual traversal to get from point A to point B. There's only 2 fast travel points, so there's quite a bit of walking involved, and there's quite a bit to actually discover. There's a lot of nooks and crannies. There is, I believe, 6 or 5 lost sectors defined. There's quite a few gold chests to track down, and Tangled Shore in general is just a nice addition. It's in between Nessus and EDZ in terms of its size. I would say it's more on par with Nessus, not quite the same size as EDZ, but that should give you a pretty good idea of how big and how quickly the traversal is throughout the Tangled Shore. Now, Tangled Shore also brings with it the Spider NPC, who can give you these bounties where you track down wanted enemies that escaped from the Prison of Elders in the initial campaign mission.
Caxus, the Betrayed!
Now, these are actually very good things that you should go out of your way to actually complete. Not only will it give you a much better chance at receiving gear that are essential to completing quests, like armor sets and weapons, but a lot of times for some of the higher tier bounties, you'll actually receive powerful rewards, and they will actually give you a very good boost in light. I'm sorry, I'm not going to call it power. They'll give you a very good boost in light that will definitely help ease your way into the rest of the new content, so I would highly recommend talking to Spider. Now, it also brings with it 2 new strikes, at least 2 new in terms of pure new content. Both of these strikes are well received additions, and there is technically a third one, but we'll get into that when we talk about the end game. So the 2 new strikes specifically for people that are playing on PS4. I mean, they technically got 3 of them, but we're not going to talk about that. So you get 2 new strikes. You get Warden of Nothing, and you get, I believe it's called the Hallowed Lair. I can't remember the second one, and I know I should have written it down in my notes, but I completely forgot about it. Both of these are very good additions to the game. They actually have some interesting mechanics, and they have some very nostalgic scenery. You'll understand when you play Warden of Nothing. So just believe me when I say that the strikes were very good additions. I mean, their strikes, they're not going to blow your mind with creativity, but it is nice that so far in Destiny 2, every single strike has been different in some form or manner in terms of the mechanics. And it just feels nice that they've continued that tradition of showing that there is a lot of creativity to be found in the strikes of this particular DLC. Now, it also brings with it some new changes to Crucible. Now, Crucible doesn't necessarily have much new unless we're talking about gear and maps, but what I'm referring to as new is the way that Crucible runs. Now, I do understand that Crucible had its update before Forsaken was dropped, but it was dropped in anticipation to get people ready for Forsaken, so I'm counting it in the same category. Now, the easiest way to describe the new Crucible is if you played any Crucible in D1, that is what you should expect from D2 now. Shotguns, fusion rifles, sniper rifles, all that are way more common. Kinetic weapons such as, auto rifles, hand cannons, and such are still very strong, and power weapons like some shotguns, some rocket launchers, and some grenade launchers are now much more difficult to actually die by. Now, the reason for this is that there's a lot less emphasis placed on actually finding that heavy ammo, because beforehand, while heavy ammo was more something you had to get for your fusion rifle or for your shotgun, it is now more something that unless you're somebody who runs a certain loadout, power ammo is specifically going to be more for rocket launchers, swords, some snipers, and some fusion rifles / shotguns. But there's really not that much of a reason to prioritize heavy ammo anymore, because shotguns, fusion rifles, and all those secondaries actually got a slight buff, and they're now on par with everything else to the point where you can run around with whatever loadout you want, and you'll pretty much guaranteed, if you're of a decent skill level, that you're going to come out on top of most scenarios if you know what you're doing. For me, this is an incredibly welcome change. I was always a very vocal person about how I felt about Destiny 2's Crucible. I felt like only getting 1 super per match essentially was very infuriating, to the point where you really couldn't actually turn the tide of any fight because nobody was really scared of you, because they knew as soon as you were shut down, there was no reason to worry about that super in the future. So and additionally, just the fact that things like fusion rifles and shotguns and snipers were all specifically tied to only power weapons really made it difficult for me to actually care about going into Crucible, because in D1, I prioritized using fusion rifles, hand cannons, and snipers. So going into D2, trying to get into Crucible was incredibly difficult. And since hand cannons never really hit a peak level of usefulness in D2, it just, for me personally, made it very difficult to ever care about how D2 was handling Crucible. Luckily, Forsaken has completely changed that meta. Everything works the way it should, and everything is back to the way it should have been in the first place. I do enjoy that they kept competitive as a 4v4, because I think that works better for the archetype that competitive has created. But I do enjoy that they brought back 6v6 for things like Rumble, Control, and for the quick play playlist. I'm glad they brought back that 6v6 mode, and I'm glad that it's here to stay. So some other new content that we can talk about is the Raid, the Blind Well, and Exotics. Now, I touched upon Exotics a little bit already. Exotics are still here. There's quite a few of them to actually get. I can't remember specifically how many were new and how many were returning, but let me just tell you that the actual grind to get Exotics is legitimately difficult now. You have to actually sink in some time and actually do some work to earn those Exotics. So don't worry, it's gonna take a while before you get that exotic stash up to pace with the rest of how your inventory looks. The Raid we'll talk about a little bit further when we get into the end game portion of this review. The Blind Well we'll talk about a little bit more when we get to the end game portion as well. So real quick, before we get into the end game part of this overview, we're going to talk about the grinding that comes with Forsaken and how approachable it is to newcomers who are just picking up Forsaken because of how heavy the advertising has been for it. So when it comes to the new ranks that have been reset for Destiny 2, they're actually a little bit easier to get a hold of now. Now, this is because just the Destiny 2 Crucible meta has changed so drastically that people are actually ranking up fairly quickly now in Crucible. Gambit is so incredibly fun that everybody wants to play it, and they've been ranking up like crazy in there as well as just the Vanguards have been given such a huge boost by giving you the option to choose between 3 different light levels to actually play the Vanguard strikes at, and the Nightfalls have so many different tiered rewards to them now that you actually will probably end up, if you're somebody who enjoys PvE a lot, you'll end up maxing out your Vanguard probably within a couple of weeks. I can guarantee you. I'm already nearly there. They made it not necessarily easy, but they made it just a hell of a lot more enjoyable to actually try to boost up your Vanguard. Now, there's also a couple of new events that come with Forsaken. They're not really anything out of the normal. You know, there's different ways to make them heroic, and they're specifically found in Tangled Shore and Dreaming City. But it's just something to consider. There's a couple of new events, so there's at least something new to experience on the daily grind. Not necessarily anything mind-blowing, but something to be aware of. Now, there's another thing that we haven't really talked about that originally I was going to put in the new content, but I thought was more appropriate to talk about here, and that is the Dreaming City. Now, the Dreaming City is, in my opinion, what every public space should have been like in the first place. Now, there's a lot of reasons for this, so bear with me. We're going to be here for a little bit talking about the Dreaming City specifically. So the Dreaming City is actually not a place that everybody has realized that they can unlock. And that's because a lot of people have pretty much not actually pursued the exotic quest that you were given by Petra after finishing the Forsaken 2 campaign. And this is a shame because, unfortunately, for people that don't realize it, it unlocks an entirely different patrol space and an entirely new thing to go explore. So if you watch this video and you haven't done that exotic quest, do yourself a favor, stop this video, exit out of this tab, minimize your web browser, go launch Destiny 2, and make sure you do that quest. Trust me, the Dreaming City is 100% worth it. So Dreaming City brings with it a host of new things to explore, to find, new secrets, new activities, new endgame content, and a new vendor. When it comes to secrets, Dreaming City, we haven't even scratched the surface. There's been a few things here and there that people have figured out, such as some things that are laying around the area, like hidden puzzles, like hidden vendors, like a few couple of quests that have unlocked specifically because of raid completions, which we'll talk about in a minute, but also things like the Blind Well, like an exclusive activity, like a host of new triumphs, like the Ascendant challenges. There has been a ton of secrets that have already been discovered in the Dreaming City, and yet Bungie has actually gone out of their way to tell us that we haven't even discovered half of it yet. There's a lot to find in the Dreaming City, and it's going to be here for quite a while, and it's just really nice to actually have a public space that's being treated as this evolving, open, changing space that is actually influenced by the people that are doing activities. Now, something that's very nice about the Dreaming City is that per every raid completion, a certain percentage of things that you can do are unlocked in the Dreaming City. So case in point, there is an ongoing campaign with Petra, and this is, you know, this isn't something you have to complete the raid to get, so don't worry. If you're not a raid person, then you're not out of luck. Per every team that completes the raid 100%, it adds like a notch into this system where new stuff is unlocked in the Dreaming City. Now, there's a whole campaign that's tied to this that we currently can't finish because either enough completions haven't been done or it's just not time to unlock it yet. But not only that, there's the aesthetics of the place changed. New secrets are unlocked, new pathways are revealed, new bosses are spawned in, new events are available, and new chests. Like, there is so much stuff to discover, and yet there's actually less that we know than we've even discovered. And I know that didn't make too much sense. There is just a lot to find in the Dreaming City, and it feels really nice to finally have a space that, you know, is more open to new people, and additionally just makes it very, very, very cool to keep coming back to, seeing what's new, finding new stuff on your own or via guides. It just feels very, very nice. Now, this leads into my next topic that I want to talk about, and this is collectibles. Now, for those of you who don't know, for those of you who are kind of Destiny 2 veterans and who have already kind of done the majority of the content, do yourself a favor, go back to old planets, go back to old strikes, start running through those lost sectors again, because there is a lot of collectibles to actually find. Now, I don't know how many lost sectors actually hold these, and I don't think anybody on YouTube has yet done a guide for every single one. There's been a few guides here and there for things like the Uldren Sov lore and things like the Ghost lore, but I don't believe all the collectibles have been found just yet. Just do yourself a favor, take your time, look around and find these collectibles, because they unlock some really cool stories. So when it comes to just the grind in general for Forsaken, I'd have to say it's more on par with D1. Now, for veterans, this is very welcome news, because we love a good grind, we love sinking hours into this game, and we love actually being rewarded for the time that we put in. For people that are only Destiny fans because of Destiny 2, then this might rub you the wrong way, because you might have enjoyed how open-ended Destiny 2 was and how forgiving it was to people that didn't put in a whole lot of hours with things like gear drops, like raid layers, and the like. Just to be clear, those are still present in the game, they're just not as frequent, and you need to actually put in the time to earn that gear. I understand for people that enjoyed the easiness of D2, they're not going to be super happy about it, but you know, this is what Bungie has chosen to do. They've chosen to go more along with the veteran crowd, which we kind of saw was starting with Warmind, and they chose to stop catering more to the casual crowd. Now, for me, I believe that was the right call, and I'm glad that Bungie did it, because it gives me a lot more incentive to play this game, and it makes me a lot happier to play this game. So now we're briefly going to talk about the end game before we get into the actual verdict of Forsaken and everything that came with it. So is the end game actually worth grinding towards? I'd have to say yes, absolutely. The more stuff you unlock, the more gear you find, the more triumphs you earn, and the more matches you complete, you will discover more and more and more of this world that you did not know existed. All the new gear looks awesome, feels awesome. The new bows especially are worth grinding for. Everything that they added into the endgame of Destiny 2 Forsaken is 100% worth the effort to put into it. Now, that being said, if you're somebody who really wants to get all three of those new subclasses, you're somebody who really wants that entire set of Tangled Shore gear, you're somebody who really wants that max triumph score, you're going to be here a long, long time, but it is absolutely worth it. The endgame, as far as I can tell, is not in any way approaching all that quickly. It is taking its time to get here. If you're somebody who really maxes out your grind time with Destiny 2, or if you're a content creator for it, then you're probably hitting around the halfway point of the end game, which even then, it's impressive. Before Forsaken, Destiny 2's end games have been so easily found, beaten, and just maximized to their full potential that, you know, within a couple of weeks of a new DLC, if not 1 week, you were pretty much on par with the highest ranked people in the game. So it is a welcome change of pace to see that Forsaken take itself a lot more seriously and slow the crawl down. Once you hit 500 light, you're going to find yourself being just maybe a little bit PO'd at, or not really pissed off. You may find yourself being a little bit surprised at just how quickly the grind gets real, but it is a welcome change of pace to me. What you should expect from the end game is, as I said before, you should just expect a lot of grinding, you should expect a lot of detail, and you should just expect that you may need to actually pay attention to what you're doing and what activities you're completing, because there's a lot to find here. Whether you're talking about the certain parameters for completing the strike powerful rewards, whether we're talking about the specific Gambit bounties, whether we're talking about Ikora's challenge, everything is done a little bit differently now, but there is a lot more to actually get rewarded for. So you should just, I guess the best way to describe what to expect when it comes to grinding for the end game in Forsaken is to actually look at what you're doing. You should go out of your way to talk to vendors, to look at the map, to look at certain lost sectors, and to actually look at your inventory of available quests and bounties to complete. That is the best way I can describe it, is just paying attention and actually taking your time. So before we get to the verdict, I wanted to briefly talk about Gambit specifically. Now the reason I wanted to do this is because for me, Gambit is the best new thing that the Destiny series has had in a very long time. I will say ever since Prison of Elders, this is the best addition that Destiny has seen, period. And that includes raids. Gambit is just, to me, it is exactly what Destiny 2 needed to establish itself, to give itself a new little identity, and to just give an entirely new reason to play the game. Gambit is just so hella enjoyable that it's hard to even put into words. I don't know specifically what it is about it, but I cannot tear myself away from it. It has been a struggle in these 20 to 30 hours that I've played the game to not just play Gambit the entire time. And this isn't even specifically because of the rewards you get, although they are definitely worth it, especially that rocket launcher, let me tell you. There's just something so enjoyable about taking out that boss in a couple of seconds and watching that bar just drop while the enemy team just gets confused as hell, or invading the enemy team and wiping the entire group and getting a triumph for it, or just, going ham on your own world and just banking large moat after large moat after large moat. There is just such a sense of satisfaction and pride in completing and winning Gambit matches that it's hard to, like I said, it's hard to put into words, but it's so worth the extra effort and the time that you get to put into it. Additionally, as I put beforehand, while the gear isn't specifically something that's 100% worth grinding for, I can say from personal experience, especially when it comes to the weapons, I have yet to get a single weapon from Gambit that I have not gone back to at some point to use in some situation. Some of these weapons, such as the sidearm and the scout rifle, are absolute beasts in PvP, and things like the rocket launcher and the grenade launcher are absolutely awesome to use in activities like the Blind Well, Escalation Protocol, and some of the raid lairs. And the armor, not too shabby looking either. I main a Titan and a Warlock. My Hunter kind of gets left onto the side to take care of when I finish the end game on my other two characters. But I can tell you, if you are a Warlock or a Titan, the gear is worth grinding for because it actually looks pretty epic. So that was it. I just wanted to talk about Gambit briefly before I actually got into the verdict of this. Now, before I give you the final impression, I do want to touch on something real quick. The reason that I didn't give you an overview of everything I talked about, such as, the way that there's paladins as the patrols for Dreaming City, or how the Blind Well functions kind of similar to Escalation Protocol, or how Gambit physically works in every activity. The reason I didn't go over those in specifics is because I didn't want to make this video obnoxiously long, and I think that when it comes to those, I think there are other people who will do it better than me, and I think that the majority of people who watch this video already kind of know about that. They already know how Gambit works, they already know that Dreaming City exists, and they already know that Crucible is completely changed, etc., etc. So I just didn't want to waste anybody's time with that, and I just didn't want to make this video so egregiously long that everybody just kept clicking on the mouse button trying to get to the next portion. So, as a final verdict for Forsaken, if we were to rate this on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd have to give it a 9 out of 10. Now, the only reason I wouldn't give it a full 10, despite not saying all that much negative about it, is because if I were to approach this as a newcomer, Forsaken halted my progress so harshly that I can see a lot of people actually playing this DLC and not caring for it and just not coming back to Destiny 2, which is just really unfortunate for this community. Now, the only other reason I'd have to dock a little bit would have to come down to the fact that I'm still not a fan of just how much content we had to wait for. We had to wait an entire year for the PC and Xbox community to get a sizable chunk of content that PS4 has had all along. Now, I know that's really nitpicky, and I know there's nothing that the community can do about that, and it's been that way since the original Destiny, but it's just something that I feel if we don't keep talking about it, it's going to keep happening as long as Destiny is still a thing. And it hurts to see the community get cut out of really cool, unique content and new gear purely because of their console of choice. That to me is just, it's still something that I can't justify Destiny doing. And while I understand it from a business perspective, I can't understand it from any other perspective, especially from a community perspective. And with how heavily involved Bungie is with their community, it's something worth mentioning. So 9 out of 10 if you're looking for a number. If you're looking for a specific recommendation, I'd have to say if you were on the fence about it, and if Osiris and Warmind really kind of rubbed you the wrong way, then Forsaken will be a very welcome breath of fresh air. And if you're somebody who had a lot of fun with D1 when it came to the grinding, the quests, the bounties, and all that, Forsaken will be something that restores your faith in Destiny. I've been seeing it across the board, both with critics and consumers. Now, there's still been a lot of naysayers who just say Destiny will never be good, just stop throwing money at it. It's your money. You spend it how you want. But if you were to base this on critical and consumer reception, Forsaken has been, everybody's been agreeing, has been the best thing that Destiny has done so far. And this is including things like the Taken King and like the initial Destiny 2 story. This is the best thing that Destiny 2 has done and that Destiny the series has done so far. So that's all I got for you today. I just wanted to make a quick video on this. I just wanted to see and try my hand at making a gaming video and editing and doing a commentary over it. I recorded all of this audio. After the fact, I wrote some very minimal notes for it. As I said in the previous video, previous live action video, I tend to try to improv all of my audio, and I know that I'm a very soft-spoken and I'm unfortunately rambling kind of person. So hopefully this helped a little bit, and hopefully this just gives me a little bit more experience with how to approach videos in the future and gives me a better feeling for editing audio. But if you liked what you heard, you liked what you saw, and you liked what I had to say about it, then definitely feel free to leave me some criticism. Feel free to shoot me a message, leave a comment, do whatever you want. Like or subscribe if you want to. I don't particularly care. You do you. You're an individual person. And that is all I got. And I will see you in the next video.